Do you know how we hide the
Can you use this?
oh, I just hide floating panel. Gotcha.
Use the laptop.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'll hide this too. Oh, that was the one. Okay. Is that better? Okay. Got. Actually, yeah. You need to control the slides, just the arrow keys.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just push the
Yes. Okay.
space bar or something like that.
Yes. Great. Okay. We'll try to check in back, but you should be good to go. Let's make sure everything else is going on.
See, is it? There we go. Yeah. Okay. So the arrows do work.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Is this work for you?
Yeah. 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 I mean, do we have everybody here? Okay. And there's so yeah. Yeah. Welcome everybody. Try. Well, are there also there's some streaming going on?
Yes. It is being live.
Okay. No, is there a camera? Or are they just seeing the slides? Okay. Well, yeah, thanks. Thank you all for coming and giving me an opportunity to talk a little bit about we're a sponsor of this event. We're a company that came out of MIT. I was a PhD student here many years ago. Our founder, Professor here. We recently made the nice discovery that you can't even spell without AI. Obviously, these days, especially if you're in business, you got to pretty much say every word. Say utter those two letters. Otherwise, we go over. So yeah, we discovered happily that you can't even spell it. So I don't think that's what the guys were thinking when they came up with the name. I can actually tell you that story. But I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the company, tell you a little bit about the company, but also I can offer unsolicited advice, my own thoughts on what's going on today and what I think are maybe interesting areas. I'd like to give, as I get older, I'd like to give young people unsolicited advice, especially when older, but they probably listen to me even less than. But yeah, so a little bit about the company. We like to say we power and protect business online. The company actually started in what's called content. We're still known to this day as a media company. We do content delivery. I'll explain a little bit about what content delivery is. It's a ubiquitous part of World Wide Web. Back in '98, when the company was no such thing as content delivery. But today, we're using, whether you know it or not, interacting with the content delivery network constantly, whether it's coming from HackMIT, a commercial content delivery network. So we do content delivery for media companies, big websites, price banks, and anything that you're doing online, the banking, through healthcare, buying things, doing online. So it might be coming through an alchemist. But there's also lots of privacy. If you're on YouTube, they have their own CDNs of what our founders do. But they have their own CDN. Facebook has their own CDN. Apple, Netflix. There's again some of the largest media companies in the world have their own CDN. So it's a ubiquitous thing invented by our founders at MIT. And we're still known primarily for content delivery. And that came about, a long time ago. I guess maybe especially from your perspective, it'll probably seem like a very long time ago. This company was founded in '98, probably well before you all were born, and in a lab not so far away. Yeah, just go down Vassar Street when you get to Broadway. No, Main Street. Go one more. When you get to Main Street, it's right there on the city corner. The building is now the Moderna. Well, you probably know if you're MIT people, CSAT, right? It's data center. So CSA is a combination of the lab. It used to be two separate labs, lab for computer science, AI lab. They were two separate labs. CSA was going to be put together. To stay center. Or like two separate labs, because in the same building, and that was the kid corner from where the state center is. The building is now. And so this would have been in that building. And this picture would have been somewhere around 1997, 98. I was a PhD student of Tom. So this is Tom, these are the two founders, Tom Layton and Danny Lewin. I was one of Tom's, I wasn't actually his PhD student. If you used algorithms book, the big white algorithms book, Corbin Lysos and Rebecca Stein. So, but I took classes with Tom. He was a reader on my thesis. So I've known him for a long time. But they basically invented these two, invented the idea of content delivery. When Danny was a graduate student in the late 90s, they started the company in 98. And yeah, still around. They obviously started with nothing. At this point, we're a company that does well over 4 billion in revenue. And a good chunk of that still comes from content delivery, but not all of it. And I'll maybe talk a little bit about. Oh yeah, okay. So the founding of the company. All right. So who recognizes this guy? Anybody? Pretty famous. No. Tim Berners. Right, who's Tim Berners? Yeah, Tim Berners-Lee is the guy who invented the World Wide Web. So he was a scientist that started in the mid-90s, and he invented what we now know as HTTP. HTTPS might have been a bit later, but HTML, HTTP, and what we now know as web. He invented it. He was a scientist and so forth, concerned. But here's what happens. He web's taken off, it was became very popular very quickly, and they form an organization they call the World Wide Web, W3C. Just so enough to say, and for whatever reason, they decided to bring it to MIT. So he moves from Switzerland here to Cambridge and starts up the World Wide Web Consortium. And for whatever random reason, they ended up putting the office space in the same building for that computer science and on the third floor. What's relevant about the third floor is the third floor is the theory, which is where I was, which is where Tom was a professor, where Danny was a graduate student. And Tim foresees a problem because he's seeing the World Wide Web take off, and people were starting to mockingly call the World Wide Web the World Wide Weight because it was just didn't have the capacity, didn't have the ability to deliver anything close to the demand. So he foresees a problem and brings that problem to Tom and Danny, brilliant mathematicians, the World Wide Weight. And he brings the problem to Tom and Danny, who invented what we now know as content delivery for the company. And this is an interesting proof case, and it's one of the stories that we like to tell. So this was the Super Bowl, 1999. So the company was founded in the summer of 1988. In was it February, right? The Super Bowl is in February. February 1999, in the Super Bowl. This happened. They ran a Victoria's Secret, ran a commercial with sort of the fashion change, the runway models. They did a bit of a fashion because they said, if you want to see more, go online, and they actually made a URL. Unbelievable. And nobody knew what a URL was. Nobody had any idea what this thing was. And probably by the way, they were I had nothing to do with it. The story is sort of pretty odd. Yeah, so they put the URL on the screen, super. And I guess most people are like, what the hell is this thing? Probably Victoria's Secret was thinking, well, nobody will have any idea what it says, but maybe a handful of people will know what it is. And they'll, figure out a way to type it into a browser and they'll go check it out. Well, they way underestimated how much people actually knew about this wide web thing. A lot of people really tried to type this thing in, and it just collapsed. It just weren't set up for anything like the like that capacity. Yeah, the internet doesn't have endless capacity to accommodate the viewers. Yeah, so basically just completely collapsed. Next year, of course, by that time, we had a product in market and they became a customer, and it was a raging success the following year. They used HackMIT. The other thing that happened in shortly thereafter, so that was in 2000, they did a successful version. And then, of course, 2001 comes along, and this is a very important year for HackMIT, tragic and inspiring, because everybody knows about September 11th. And many of you know this, but many of you probably don't. Dan, the co-founder, was killed. He was on flight 11 out of Boston that morning on his way to go see Disney, and he was up front, business class, with the terrorists, and they actually killed him on the airplane before it was that. So Danny was killed on 9/11, obviously an enormous tragedy. I remember it's a stunning day, obviously. I was in San Diego, by the way. We had acquired a company in San Diego, and they asked me to move to San Diego to help run the acquired company. I'm from Southern California native, for a long time. But anyway, so I moved to San Diego. The whole thing happened while I was in San Diego, and we're all like watching TV and sold. We're all just stunned. Then I get the call from the president, Paul Soldier. But the other thing that happened on that day is that everybody went to get their news online because it happened during the workday. If people had been at home, if this had happened like a Saturday or a Sunday or the middle of the night in the USA, and everybody's at home, they all would have turned on. But many people thought this was happening at work. They didn't have it. So they had access to the internet, so they're all the news outlets had a problem. They gave us immediately got them on our network, and we were able to keep everybody apprised of what was going on through the invention of the complicated day in history of the company, but an important proof point. But the idea, what they invented was basically in the old way of doing things, when Victoria's Secret put this thing up, is you serve everything out of, well, today it will be a cloud data center, where you basically have all your infrastructure in one place, in two places, network connections coming out of that data center. And that's where things bog down, because even giant pipes still have only finite capacity and way less capacity than the amount of capacity that you have out here at the edge. Because if you think about all the homes that have broadband, and back then they only had a couple of megabits per second, 50 gigabits, so back then megabits. But if you add that up over all the homes that are trying to access this thing, it's actually a lot of expensive. So it's still true to this day, even more so to this day. If you look at the capacity out here, it's orders of magnitude greater than the capacity in the center, even if you're in a data center with gigantic multi-gig, multi-terabit pipes. So the invention was to use math and algorithms to, instead of delivering centrally, deliver distributed. So the way our content delivery network works is it's our software running on hundreds of thousands of servers, and they're deployed all over. When we say hundreds of thousands of servers, that's not like a basic number. It's still with Google or Facebook or others. But what's unique about it is that it's distributed as thousands of locations. Where Google have their millions of servers, maybe pools of locations, we have our hundreds of thousands of servers and thousands of locations all over the world. So we can deliver the content from servers that are near the end users before we get the bottleneck center. That's the inventions. And to this day, that's a big part of our business. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that over half of our revenue. So I mentioned we're about 4 billion, a little over 4 billion, over 2 billion of it, a little over half is actually cyber. Not a lot of people realize this. And I can actually remember how that. We didn't really get into cybersecurity and emerged as a business until something like 2010, 2011. But our first commercial customer was the White House. So 2002, maybe early 2000s. Bush was in the White House, and there was a attack, a cyber attack, before many people knew what cyber attacks were, and it was a code red. It targeted WhiteHouse.gov. That's not White House already had. That's WhiteHouse.gov. So Target was the White House, they're not a customer. But there was a guy working at the White House who was remarkably clueful about these sorts of things. His name was Richard Cohen. And he knew about HackMIT. I remember he came from Washington, came up here to visit us, and we showed him around. And he looked around everything we were doing. I have hundreds of thousands of servers all around the world, massive amounts of capacity. Why can't you guys stop this attack for me? If I put whitehouse.gov on your CDN, you're delivering all my content. That means that anything you guys can get to my website comes from you, and you can block anything that looks like an attack. All you gotta do is just look for what looks like an attack and block the stuff that you attack. I thought that's a pretty darn good idea. And we did. They basically has a custom one for the White House. And it wasn't until years later that we actually commercialized it, went into business and started signing up banks and insurance companies and commerce and, you know, all of that. And we went from preventing things like DDoS attacks to web app attacks to various kind of enterprise layer attacks, ransomware, a big deal. And so, yeah, more than half of our business is cybersecurity. Generally, when we think about our business today, we think of it as content delivery plus cybersecurity plus cloud computing. We actually, about 4 or 5 years ago, we acquired a company called Blumofe. Have you guys used Blumofe? It's a pretty, and it's cheap, by the way. If any of you are like sort of hobbyists, you want to like go things on the cloud for hobby. I don't know what you use for that, but Linode is a pretty good option. Pretty cheap, and you can just provision a virtual machine very easily, install whatever you want, and pretty easy. Cloud computing platform, really focused on the infrastructure layer. It's cheap infrastructure, and we now go to market not just to developers, random people, but we go to market to our enterprise sector. So we now sell Linode as a direct competitor to Amazon, to Microsoft Azure, to Google Cloud, to Oracle Cloud, sell directly to competitively against into our big enterprise customers. And by the way, HackMIT is generally an enterprise customer company. We don't generally sell to small companies. That's all of our customers are. Big banks, insurance companies, healthcare, commerce, media, companies that you've heard of. Yeah, so that's actually a bit about HackMIT. Yeah, so a little bit of an ad. You probably see. Have you seen the building? This is our headquarters building. It's down on the corner there at Broadway and Galileo, I think is what it's called. Yeah. So you might have seen the building. This is our headquarters building. And I have a few slides here on back to the AI. We started using AI about a decade ago, and I've characterized, this comes up with almost all enterprises today. We'll characterize AI in 3 F's, and that's true for us. They don't usually use this language, not language that I started using, but when I talk to our customers, whether it's a bank or a commerce company or a media company, they all kind of echo a similar thing, which is the sort of pre-AI, which is pre-2010s. Where companies really just didn't use AI at all, unless you were a robotics company or in certain specific areas, just weren't using that. And that's pre-2010s. And then something happened in the mid-2010s that changed all that. It's on the slide, but who knows what I'm talking about? What happened in the mid-2010s? That's not the right timing for cloud, but that's not the specific thing I'm talking about. Yeah, deep learning. Yeah, neural networks actually go way back before that. In fact, who knows how old the term AI is? Where does the first term? This is fairly good. 1930. Yeah, 1950s. So in the 1950s, there was a workshop that was held up at Dartmouth. And Claude Shannon, Marvin Minsky, John McCarthy, I forget who the others were, but 4 or 5 of them. And they decided to have a workshop on artificial intelligence. And it's the first known use of that term, artificial intelligence. You can find this online. They wrote a proposal to the government to fund a workshop up at Dartmouth. It's 1955. They wrote the proposal. The actual workshop was in 1956. That's the first known use of the term artificial intelligence. But if you actually read the proposal, it's short. It's actually quite boring. it's short, but it's boring because most of it's about budgets and, you know, how they do with tech. Most of it's short, most of it's boring, but there is some stuff about some of the areas that are investing, you know, promising avenues for achieving some form of artificial intelligence. Neural nets is in there. It's actually section 3 of the document. It's all about the neural nets. And the reason I remember that is because it surprised me. When I went and looked at that, I was like, wait, neural nets, I thought neural nets was a more recent thing. The idea that neural net goes back even before it was run artificial intelligence. But what happened in the mid-2010s is the invention of deep. Well, what's the difference between just a neural net? Yeah, deep learning is simply using neural network. Back then, in the early days of neural nets, they basically built neural nets that are typically today called perceptrons, where you just have an input layer, an output layer, and the output layer. It's basically one layer of neural net. If you go beyond that, that's called deep learning. Now, you practice deep learning neural nets are way deeper than 3 or 4 or 5, and they're thousands to millions of layers deep. But deep learning was invented in the mid-2010s, and people generally trace it to a network known as AlexNet. AlexNet was one of the first neural nets that did a reliable job of image classification. And yeah, they basically studied the neural net that probably maybe 1,000 layers or so. A few million weights. It was like a 5 million weight model. They could classify among about 1,000 different things, from cars to trucks to different animals and people, things like that. But it classified 1,000 different things in images. And that was really the birth of deep learning. And by the way, the thing that really made it work, the reason it took off around then is that they could, most of the technology was known. The idea of using neural net with multiple layers was known, but they combined a known algorithm for training neural. So you know, what's the name of the algorithm that we all use to do neural nets? Back propagation, right? Stochastic gradient descent and back propagation, right? That was known actually, but it wasn't widely used. They used that. The other thing that they used is they used a neural net architecture that was designed for image recognition. Maybe you know what that is. So it's a CNN, convolutional neural net. That's right. So convolutional neural net. So the other thing that they did, even back then, is they used GPUs. So that combination made the thing work. That's the birth of deep learning. And the reason I think that's so important is that that's the moment that AI life emerged in the enterprise. AI life existed in academia and robotics, like that, but in a bank or a commerce company or a healthcare company, AI just didn't exist. And so that's true for HackMIT as well. And it turns out for us, deep learning was the perfect tool for our cybersecurity business, because with our cybersecurity business, we're seeing huge amounts of traffic on our networks, huge amounts of HTTP GET response, HTTPS posts and response. You see all this traffic go back and forth. When we can see the traffic, the question is, what's normal, what's abnormal, what's benign, what's malicious, what's human, what's bot? That's what you need to know to do when you're doing cybersecurity. You got to classify the traffic. Obviously, a human can't do that. You can just dictate numbers in terms of the number of transactions that we see that you can train neural nets. So we started using deep learning in our cybersecurity business as a way to automatically detect normal, abnormal, benign, malicious, and that's true of many companies, not necessarily the cybersecurity, but something else. If you were a bank, neural nets, deep learning was the perfect tool for fraud detection. If you were an insurance company, it's the perfect tool for figure out how long people are going to live there. Anyway, and then of course, 2022, right? November 30th of 2022, it's an important date. That's the day chat release. That, of course, is not the first LLM by a long stretch. LLMs way predate November 30th of 2022, but that's when LLMs hit the bottom. And I give OpenAI a lot of credit for about what they did back then, which is they kind of for the first time figured out how to get an LLM to do things useful. Back then, ChatGPT, if you use an LLM and you ask it a question, as likely as not, it wouldn't answer your question. It would give you perfectly reasonable text, but it wouldn't really answer your question. They were the first ones to figure out how to use things like supervised fine-tuning and reinforcement learning with human feedback in the context of a large language model to improve what's called alignment and do things like answer questions. And so for the first time, you had an LLM that's actually useful. They made it publicly available in a form, and obviously they went bananas. And so I refer to that as a Cambridge explosion because suddenly we're at a mode now where AI became useful for such a wide, the aperture just opens wide up. We at HackMIT was, before generative AI or large language model, that, as I said, we really only even use AI in a few niche areas for things like our cybersecurity products. But once you get to completely LLM, you actually use it in almost any. At this point, I don't know, there's like 30, 40, or 50 projects around the company who have already adopted AI. They work or they're experimenting with building something new, typically some form of genetic AI, or something automate, right? It's not just ask the LLM a question like a chatbot. It's you interact with the LLM to get something done. And it interacts with tools, and it interacts with data sources, and it actually automates certain parts of the workflow. So it's become a ubiquitous feature in the company. And that's pretty good of almost every company deal with. I'm gonna say. I'd say a lot of companies have taken very different approaches. A lot of companies with the emphasis on AI have taken a very centralized ownership. We're going to have an office of AI, and they're going to own it. And we've taken a very different approach. This was very much something that I was giving the company. I want everybody in the company to experiment with AI, use it, try it out, and ideally try building things with it. But obviously, we have to do that safely. Our customers are a regular industry like that, big banking, healthcare. Those are regular industries. The stakes are high. We cannot be screwing up. And we have to be very careful. So what we've tried to do is put in place infrastructure like sandboxes and as well as training that allow anybody in the company to be able to experiment with AI, build something agentic, but do it in a way that gives them a fun for our consumers. So I think of it as sort of a distributed ownership. A lot of companies are very centralized out there. We're distributed ownership, but we have a centralized organization that's an agent. And I run a big part of that, which is, as I said, building sandbox infrastructure, training, and coordination, things like that. So, yeah, for a company like that, it's worked out pretty well. Honestly, I mean, I can talk a lot about where I think it's going and what I think we'll need to be thinking about doing to make it successful. If you want to do this as questions and ask a question.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Your experience. I'm very curious to talk about the experience and the different calls.
Yeah, so the question about Cloudflare and what they're doing. Cloudflare is an interesting company. They emerged about 15 years ago as competitors, or direct competitor to us. Focused more on the cybersecurity. They don't really do like this stuff. Focus more on cybersecurity. They did a very, in my opinion, very clever thing. Is they took what we do. And again, what we do is really focus on the big need healthcare, all that stuff. And they took it down market. They made it easier to use and priced it in a way that small companies and even developers, like hobbyists, can use. Like if you're a hobbyist, I mentioned you can use Linode, but other parts of HackMIT, if you want to use our web app firewall, we just don't sell this to small companies, with the one exception of our Linode service. Cloudflare, yeah, took what we've done and basically followed along and built a version of it that is for developers, really. And they did a pretty nice job of it. Now, when it comes to selling to banks and companies like that, they show up some, but they're not really at that level. You have to deliver a lot of reliability to yourself. Things like that. Like there are some countries where nearly every bank in the country is on. If we have a significant outage, that country can't do banking. The stakes are that high, and Cloudflare doesn't work at that level. That number of lines, but they're pretty. Again, there are competitors who have to be. I don't want to say too much nice about them. But I'm impressed by what they've done, you know, sort of for the developer and sort of the down market. That's an important point. Next.
Yeah, so I'm curious about the warehouse attack problem. So I wonder why not warehouse to some extent just themselves, the document themselves, but use the like real time to get an advantage for the distribution server over like warehouse responsive.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the question is, why couldn't they just do it themselves? In fact, before HackMIT got into Web App Firewall, the way Web App Firewall would work is you buy, generally a client, you buy a box, or multiple boxes, so you put them in your data center. You're a company, you got a data center, you put the Web App Firewall in your data center. All the traffic that comes into your data center passes through that box. The box looks at all the traffic and says, ooh, this looks like an attack, block it. This doesn't look like an attack, let it through. But it happens inside your data center. Now things moved a little bit with cloud, and instead of a physical box, it becomes a virtual box that you deploy in your cloud data center. But the same idea. Here's the problem with it, is that if the attack is big enough, and a lot of these attacks these days can get in moments, if the attack is big enough, by the time it gets to your data center or your cloud data center, you're already dead in the water. Because you're just dealing with such a high volume that literally that box, that web firewall box just keels over from the amount of traffic. The only way to deal with that level of volume and that scale is to block the attack at the edge of where it originated from, not where it's destined.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was curious how because we talked about how revolutionary was AI, but also for a company like HackMIT, know what has been the impact of blockchain technologies and distributed technologies.
So the question about blockchain. Yeah, blockchain is a pretty interesting technology. We did actually work with a partner, one of the biggest banks in Japan. Actually, we built a blockchain ledger that actually, you know, record breaking in terms of its throughput. It's a really clever, you can see distributed, you know. That's kind of our hallmark, is doing things in a distributed way for clever math as opposed to core. So far, it hasn't really taken off. So we have this thing. It's not really a meaningful part of our business. That could change at some point, but that's really our only foray into blockchain. It's building some financial service of ledger. It's pretty interesting technology. We do have a version of it that scales very nicely. I don't know that there's yet a great market for it, or if there is, we haven't get that. But maybe we can.
Thank you. Very safe. So my question is very unlike your content delivery system. Is there any you have seen major change that AI is coming in your algorithms or animations? How do you evaluate that if it is giving short as marks?
Yeah, actually, a lot of the so the question about AI and how it impacts the CDN. So in terms of using AI to improve the CDN, most of the stuff that you're trying to do with the CDN is actually solved very well algorithmically. With techniques that are algorithmically provable, sort of properties that you know run in efficient time, give you solutions that are provably, you know, within certain levels of optimal or actually optimal, things like that. We don't get that okay. And this is one of the things I always tell people. As cool as AI is, don't use AI as your solving. Some things are just better solved with different algorithms. Don't forget your algorithms. And that's not just because you know Tom said that's all we have. You know, fathers that I don't. We're going to bring back some things. So Tom wanted to put something to bring back together. Of course, everybody goes to run. But anyway, all that. Don't forget your algorithm, and don't use AI to solve it with an algorithm. Please. So yeah, so most of the stuff that we do with the CDN that we talk about. Some of the areas where I think people learn it, maybe not LLM, but for people, I think it finds with some of the operation events, you know, some manual alerts, alerts. We've got to finish the audit with a lot of the but testing all the code, but it's testing the rollout of changes and things like that. Obviously, code development, things like that. I would say for the most part, it's less likely to be done. The way this can function, and we are about how we operate the level of thought. However, because you asked about that, we move to the other side. The two things. Decided something. I actually think AI is, well, it's probably the greatest thing that ever happened. You know, I often have said that, you know, when it comes to criminals and the defendants, you actually have to learn from the defendant. Probably favorite thing that it's a great tool for figuring out what's in online. I think you'll see it massive, but you know, the bad guys, it comes to getting like debates that can walk through the fraud. And if you do it at scale, even if a lot of stress, it doesn't matter. Because you want, you kind of have 100 just generated value. That doesn't, yeah, it's a ridiculous. And by the way, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, there's a great resource here at end of every there's a thing called AI risk. Yeah, AI risk. You will find it on very nice AI. And it's basically a catalog or taxonomy of risks from AI. But it's hypothetical. The risk register is a list that hypothetical risks. But part of this register is what they call the gold standard. Which you'll find things like from you go to the AI risk thing with the bundle to the AI risk. And that is actually a registry of the bad things that AI. And it goes back quite a few years, but there's a very interesting trend in the data over the last 2 years. It's exploded, the number of users has exploded, and it's all been in 2 categories, both of which are characterized by getting. It's using AI for things like misinformation, a lot of which is politically inappropriate, as well as bad guys using it for getting fraud. A lot of it is it's a scary thing that if you go to the Reddit community and start to use it is a pretty scary read. As I said, a lot of it is consumer. Well, I mean, a lot of it's political. A lot of consumer thought. Just how big a problem that is. Saying, you know, come to this website, you'll get a free coupon because it's immediate, my favorite website. People go to that website. Or if you wait for say, hey, buy this site. Or crypto, something like that. Basically, that's consumer fraud. I think a huge problem. Obviously, AI is being used now to create an hardware to run some facts. So if you're interested in cybersecurity, gotta be thinking about where it's going, and where it's going. It's a bad place. So you have to go back to using AI. But the bad to change. So if you can point out a startup and cybersecurity, things about what you need to do to protect people from cybercriminals to reducing AI. My personal opinion is that there's no magic AI solution. AI is part of the solution for sure. If you're starting cybersecurity, obviously you're missing. But there isn't a magic AI solution. Last people are claiming I said which is such a a company that says we could detect deep fakes. Bullshit. Well, maybe they're doing it with some reliability today. They went through. So, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in cybersecurity change. Everything we've been doing in cybersecurity for and I just probably especially in big markets. It's like a bank or less acceptable is like fraud because they have such a deep process that they're audited. Like for example, if you did deep fake of the chief financial officer of a bank. A deep fake of a call the people saying, hey, it's just said I'm the CFO and I got a check to this company for $10 million because we need to get this done. They wouldn't do it because the only way that, they go to the bank, you said they check, and there's the full audit, sure, there's gotta be an invoice, but they got costs, really costs, but if you're, Billy speaks at shop, it's a private business and they're just doing it by protocol. And when, when teenage somebody gets a call from mom, it looks like mom, it sounds like mom, and mom says, you have to fully supplier, that's a business. But I think the big market is very successful. You can come up with a good solution. I guess that's a big item. All right, you go. Very that's a great. So the question is how the AI helps people. But people, it hasn't done much, if at all. I think you might. That's a very clear idea of putting AI. Pretty much over people that say this, especially. I love using it, and I use it all the time. Obviously, I still do developers. This I was developed years ago. We have very, a lot of faith. I usually do that because we know that it's not. And I don't use it. Because I believe I'm not really something you say. So, better tools, because I don't see anything exactly. You use it in the program, it's a concept. This is background use. My background is up. I was in AI social development, so I sent it out. But it's still a big part of myself. My wife will give me here. If you go to the robots, schools that we do a lot. So that's the 50th of Zella. Your few runs in terms of robot. And so that's 30 the robotics. But the most of my career is so distant from anything that I did. Obviously, in the last few years, I've found that I'm having some really good stuff. Learned a lot from it. One of the things that I've learned from her is careful device. If it's true, go.
Thank you. Kim, like, this is your great information. Actually, technical problems. She first of all, the policy chat. What do you look like? It's long, short, still big.
Yeah, so it's a question of how we decide problems to look at who's first there customers. One of the nice things about focusing on enterprise, you can be with the customer. If you're a single company or you've got really million customers, obviously you spend a lot of time. But if you deal with a small number of big customers, you can be very into it. So that's how we. Let me have a couple of comments. In terms of those, I make some comments about that. That's going to think about that. My personal view on it says the first thing we provide is the use of AI with building authentic solutions for particular. I fully believe that general purpose of AI, having access to a chatbot, doesn't really move the needle for most of it. And there's reasons to say that they had to do it where they survey a whole bunch of results and look at it. That's what's its failure for their AI class. The characteristic of failure is almost always broad push out. You should roll out ChatGPT to get everybody from everyone use text. They love it, it's fine, but it doesn't mean that you go on profit losses. Where you move the needle is building solutions that are narrow but deep. they're deeply integrated into company workflows, tools, processes. And so if I was starting a company, I would be thinking about a domain that I know something about, that I to know something about. Whether it's the law or the terms, that's a team that knows a lot about that, and focus on using AI to solve a problem. Not a chatbot, not a chatbot may be a phone, or it's other build narrow the AI solution. I think that's the thing actually forward. I'll give you one more people advice, especially from Bruce. Lots of things like I wish I did better. Focus on the people around you. Yes, you know. The story I told you anytime is how I. And then you know, I joined about a year ago. When I had the opportunity, and I was making a decision about whether or not I didn't even know if it was a thing, but I knew it was strong as a vendor, and it would be a vendor, and it was other people from. But I knew about those people that were brilliant, they're hardworking, they're funny, they're very sensitive people. And I knew a little bit about this. Stay close to these people, good things that and that was provided. And I couldn't believe you know about something. The real matters is so if you're doing what they're doing, college, grad school, whatever it is, pay attention to which people are those, which people inspire you, which people make you laugh. And stay close to those people. They start building, they join the company. Stay close to the people that inspire you who are building to be so that's my advice for all of those people. I wish I had known that had taken it. It was very fun.
I just want to make thank you for getting me the content. Irrespective of the masters, the last time. Thank you so much.
But this one,
I speak up. Hopefully online. Audible.
Really very nice, very helpful, very informative. I love it. And one of the questions that I had actually kind of covered that. Getting to know AI is different, but the domain is specific application.
I'll just stop sharing this slideshow.
AI specific use cases. But
I'm just
rather than hitting on that layer so they can get hard on site with the site layer or like that. So application specific or domain specific things. When it happens with the whole procedure, for example, software running the getting a platform, it log in, they go down to file using the cyber security get granted permissions and all these things. And this happens for most of the domain. There were some companies granting the bad actor permission allows resources, then they